if you have a finite supply with a constricted circulating supply and demand, like country level liquidity starts to come into the market, you should expect a much higher price point. Now, how high is that? Is that 120,000, 150,000, 200,000? I don't know. That's for you all to decide. You guys are all smarter than me. But I do think that we get a much higher price. And so to me, that's the single most important thing is Bitcoin will have officially climbed all the way up the hill of critics if the United States embraces it. And so what I think is the single most important thing for Bitcoin right now is the strategic Bitcoin reserve. If we get the strategic Bitcoin reserve, we go much higher very quickly. I also think that what you are going to see is the full penetration of Bitcoin into many countries, maybe not all, but many countries, balance sheet or sovereign wealth funds if the United States does it.
Anthony Pompliano, one of the most well-known figures in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency space, has continuously offered audacious forecasts and perceptive observations that have influenced the conversation about digital assets. Pompliano, who has a history in traditional finance, has long supported the digital gold narrative and is unrelenting in his focus on Bitcoin's potential as an inflation hedge. Since Bitcoin's explosive growth and the increasing use of cryptocurrencies are changing financial markets in 2024, his projections have drawn even more attention. But given the market's volatility and unpredictability, what does Pompliano think the future holds for Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency industry as a whole? Are we about to enter a new period of volatility, or is the bull market just getting started? We will explore Pompliano's perspectives on the significance of Bitcoin in international finance. Remember to click the subscribe button and enable notifications to ensure that you never miss our most recent analysis. Thank you and enjoy the video.
So we know that Bitcoin started 2024 around $40,000. The ETFs got approved and Bitcoin skyrocketed throughout the year. It went to $100,000. It's a really big milestone. Everyone was super excited about it. And obviously Bitcoiners felt like they had been on this redemption curve. They were right. All the critics were wrong. Bitcoin at 100K felt like a psychological moment. But now Bitcoin has kind of gone sideways. It went up to 109,000. It dropped to 92. It's gone back over 100. It dropped back below 100. It's kind of sitting around $95,000 to $100,000. And I see a lot of Bitcoiners getting bored. I see them starting to get antsy. They're worried. Is the bull market over? What's going on? Everyone calm down, take a deep breath. But here's my word of caution, is that a lot of the activity we're seeing in meme coins and elsewhere, this is short-term speculation. This is people saying, I don't want to think long-term. There's a void of focus and discipline. And so I'm going to go play in meme coin land, or I'm going to go play in these other assets. Instead, you got to stay focused. And so what this really tells me is that there's a bifurcation of both conviction and information in the market. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that there's some people who are short-term oriented. They're simply looking at what is the daily price? What else is going on in the market? What's the shiny new thing? That's where their information bucket is they're filling it with as much shiny things as possible. Then there's a whole nother bucket of people who are long-term information oriented. They're thinking about what is the price today? What do I think the price is going to be in 5 or 10 years? What do I think is the true value of a decentralized digital asset that provides sovereignty and censorship resistant to anyone in the world that wants to protect their economic value? That is a long-term thinker. That's a very different information source than the people who are short-term oriented and just looking at what the latest shiny thing is. And so what that leads me to is right now is actually some of the most interesting times of Bitcoin. Now, why is it interesting to me? It's interesting whenever a lot of people start to get bearish or they start to get lulled to sleep, because usually what I have seen in my time in evaluating this asset and paying attention and holding it is that is the moment when we start to get to a point where then Bitcoin will erupt in either direction. People are lulled to sleep. They don't think anything's going to happen. And bam, we go in either direction. Now, it could be down or it could be up. In this case, I actually think one of the best indicators as to why the price likely goes up rather than down is that we have seen an incredible persistent bid in the market every time Bitcoin has gone to correct. If you go back to 2017 and in 2020 and 2021, every time we had these bull markets, Bitcoin would correct 30% or more a couple of times during the cycle. So obviously in 2017, there was like 5 or 6 different corrections to 30% or more. In 2021, we actually saw a 50% correction after a 50% correction in 2020. So COVID, 50% correction in a single day for Bitcoin. And then in May of 2021, we saw that there was a 50% correction after the China ban of Bitcoin mining. And so you had 2 50% corrections in 2 years. Crazy. Most assets, you can never go through that. But what have we seen so far? We have gotten some 15% drawdowns. We've gotten some, what I would say, definitely drawdowns, but they're not 30%. They're not 40, 50%. And so what that means is as Bitcoin is trying to cool off and correct, which is very healthy in a bull market, there's actually such a persistent bid. There's so many people that want to buy Bitcoin that what you're seeing is you're seeing people step in almost immediately and say, hey, I'm not going to let it fall below some price. Doesn't mean it can't happen. Doesn't mean that it can't continue to go down before it goes back up. But it does signal that there is a very healthy demand for Bitcoin. And I think that's where you see the price having gone up so much. Look, anytime an asset goes from $40,000 to $100,000 in 12 months, it's got to cool off a little bit. It's hot, it's very hot. So let the thing go ahead and cool off. Let it go sideways. Don't be lulled to sleep. It will eventually be just fine.
Both Bitcoin and gold have experienced significant increase in the last 12 months. Historically seen as a reliable, low volatility asset, gold has increased by roughly 50% to nearly $3,000 an ounce. This increase indicates that investors are seeking refuges against inflation and economic unpredictability. The strong increases in gold and Bitcoin indicate that the true pressure on prices may be substantially higher, despite official inflation estimates showing a modest 3% yearly increase. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now let's dive back into the interview.
And one of the things that I think people don't give enough credit for is it's not just how early you find Bitcoin or how early you bought Bitcoin. It is how consistent or how hard you press your conviction. This is true of all assets. So if you go and you find a great stock and you think that if I buy it today, it's going to go up, that's great, but you may only have so much money. And so you go and you buy it. But if you never buy another share, then you're only limited to what that initial purchase was. Obviously, if you've got conviction and you continue to buy the stock and you're dollar cost averaging into the stock, you're likely to end up with way more shares. And even if the stock price was going up, because you have so many shares, then that price appreciation ends up helping you make more money. So your first dollar, let's say you made 10x. Your second dollar, you made 9.5x. Your third dollar, you only made 9x. 9x is still pretty good, and continue down that trend, right? Doubling down, tripling down, pressing your winners is really important. I remember one time I asked Mark Yusko, who was an LP in a bunch of great investors' funds, I said, what separates the top 1% from the top 20%? And he said to me, it's very simple. The best investors in the world, they press their winners harder than anyone else, and they sell their losers faster than anyone else. Press your winners, sell your losers. And so naturally, Bitcoin is a great example of this. Many of the people I know who have accumulated an immense amount of Bitcoin, yes, some of them found Bitcoin in 2010, but they continued to acquire more Bitcoin. Others found Bitcoin in 2020. Look at MicroStrategy. Literally, 2020 was their first purchase. They now have almost 2% of the total supply. And so why is it? It's pressing your winners. Conviction, continuing to accumulate. Now, that doesn't mean that you go do something undisciplined or you lose emotional control. It just means that you can't get lulled to sleep. You can't get sidetracked. And so being able to understand what is Bitcoin, has the thesis changed? Why is the price going sideways? Everyone relax, take a deep breath. It's going to be fine. If you go ahead and you take a look, Bitcoin still 1 out of every 2 Bitcoin in circulation has not moved in 2 years. Very important. Bitcoiners are not selling. And so whenever you have a finite supply with a constricted circulating supply and that illiquidity, and then you get increased demand, it's gangbusters. And so what I think is the single most important thing for Bitcoin right now is the strategic Bitcoin reserve. If we get the strategic Bitcoin reserve, we go much higher very quickly. I also think that what you are going to see is the full penetration of Bitcoin into many countries, maybe not all, but many countries, balance sheet or sovereign wealth funds if the United States does it. Why? Go back to 2020. If you remember, Paul Tudor Jones, Stanley Druckenmiller came out and they said that they owned Bitcoin. When they said that they owned Bitcoin, what we saw was that a ton of other people on Wall Street said, well, if it's good enough for the goats, it's good enough for me. Well, America is the goat of countries when it comes to finances. They are seen as the leader. They are able to issue US treasuries. The dollar is the global reserve currency. The US has the greatest capital markets, the most liquidity, the most popularity, etc. And so if the United States decides that they're going to do it, other countries, they're going to say, hey, we might want to get on this train as well. And so naturally, the game theory plays out. I do think the United States will do it and other countries will follow. If you have a finite supply with a constricted circulating supply and demand, like country level liquidity starts to come into the market, you should expect a much higher price point. Now, how high is that? Is that 120,000, 150,000, 200,000? I don't know. That's for you all to decide. You guys are all smarter than me. But I do think that we get a much higher price. And so to me, that's the single most important thing is Bitcoin will have officially climbed all the way up the hill of critics if the United States embraces it. Now, why am I bullish? Well, obviously there's lulling. 2, we've got the administration that is very pro-Bitcoin. 3, I think, is that Bitcoin is transitioning from something that the mainstream media used to critique and attack and say, hey, this is stupid. These guys and girls are all going to destroy capital, etc. Now, mainstream media seems pretty interested. They're not full-on bulls. They're not going to go out and write articles about Bitcoin is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I do think that they have now transitioned from a negative viewpoint to maybe a cautiously optimistic viewpoint. Hey, these people might be onto something. This may work. This thing may actually end up being what these people said it was going to be. I see the government talking about it. I remember they were saying that in the early 2010s, that the government was going to eventually like Bitcoin. It wasn't going to ban Bitcoin. The best results and the best track record is winning. And that's right now what Bitcoin's been doing. Bitcoin has been fulfilling the prophecy that it came from many of the early Bitcoiners. So the media is now having to say, well, look, the results speak for themselves. I got to pay attention to this thing. And so that is a huge kind of green flag, very bullish, is that now some of the most ardent critics, they're softening. Doesn't mean that they're going to become fans, but they're just softening, which is very important. And so what's fascinating to me is the backdrop of all this is gold is also going up. Gold has been up 50% year over year. It's about to hit $3,000. That's crazy. Gold, which is usually seen as something that is not that volatile, it's up 50%. Now, why is that important? Well, the government data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is telling you that inflation is 3%. 3% year over year for January. So from 2024 to 2025, January to January, inflation was 3%. Do you believe that? I don't know. I don't. Why? Well, the money supply grew 5% in 2024. So if inflation is only 3%, but the money supply grew 5%, those two numbers don't add up. Then if you add in the fact the stock market was up 25%, Bitcoin was up 100%, gold was up 50%. Why did gold get more valuable? What happened? It's not like the gold bar changed. It's not like some chemist figured out some unique element that they introduced to gold that made it more valuable. 50%. There's probably a lot of people who are worried about inflation and other kind of chaotic, uncertain events. They're driving more demand for gold. And it went up 50% in 12 months. These are the types of things you got to pay attention to. Is you can't be kind of siloed, laser focused, only looking at Bitcoin. Bitcoin operates within a global financial system. And if you're a long-term holder of Bitcoin, you can simply just continue to dollar cost average, accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. But you got to pay attention. You got to look at these other things. Gold goes up 50%. What's interesting about that is that gold usually leads Bitcoin. When gold goes up, Bitcoin goes up slightly a little bit later.
Anthony Pompliano explains why he is confident in Bitcoin and provides his optimistic outlook on the cryptocurrency. He lists a number of important elements that support his optimism. First, Pompliano highlights the administration's pro-Bitcostance position, which indicates a favorable regulatory climate. Additionally, he observes that mainstream media has shifted from a critical perspective to one that is cautiously enthusiastic, acknowledging that Bitcoin might be the game-changing asset that many early proponents had envisioned. It is a really good thing that critics have changed their minds. Pompliano goes on to relate the growth of Bitcoin to the performance of gold, which has increased by 50% over the last 12 months to almost $3,000 an ounce. According to him, the sharp rise in gold and Bitcoin shows that investors are looking for safer assets because of worries about inflation and world uncertainties. Even though official inflation data only points to a 3% increase, he underlines that the fact that both Bitcoin and gold are outside of the established financial system and follow sound money principles makes them both appealing during uncertain times. Pompliano emphasizes the value of having strong convictions when making Bitcoin investments. Successful investors, he says, are not merely early adopters. Rather, they are individuals who continuously purchase and hold their assets, pushing their successes while reducing losses on underperforming ones. MicroStrategy, which started purchasing Bitcoin in 2020 and currently owns close to 2% of the entire supply, is the example he cites. Long-term gains are expected to be significant for investors who remain true to their convictions and keep accumulating Bitcoin. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and enable notifications for more valuable content, and as always, happy investing.